feel like I'm going to be exposing the gardening and homesteading world a little bit in this video, and I just want to talk to you about the truth about gardening. And it's become really popular ever since COVID happened, and we've been seeing some food supply shortages, and the industry has changed a lot. And I just want to talk to you about it today because I don't know if it's changed for the better. So let's talk about this. What's up? My name is Bree from Urban Gardening Canada, and I garden in Ottawa Zone 5. And I just wanted to have a coffee, or in my case, a tea with you, and just talk about the truth about gardening. Because we have a lot of perceptions of what gardening is, or if we're a gardener, or who's a gardener, or homesteading. And I just think that there's some things that need to be exposed in this industry, and I wanted to talk about them today. So let's talk about some of the negatives and some of the positives back and forth, so it doesn't look like it's too angry or negative of a video. And we'll start with the most casual first, and then we'll build our way up to more of the tea that I want to talk about. And so the first thing that I want to talk about is an idea of a green thumb. And this one I just want to talk about because I had a conversation with someone online who was embarrassed to show me a picture of their tomatoes when really it's not a big deal. And she said, "Oh, I don't have a green thumb, I can't do it." And I think that people have this perception that a green thumb is something that someone is just born with. But the reality is that every single gardener has killed as many plants as they've kept alive. And it's the same for houseplants as well. People don't just have amazing houseplants because they bought one time and it survived and did amazing. Like, no, we've killed equal amounts. And so a green thumb is not something you're born with. It's really an interest that you have. And the first few plants that you grow do terribly, and you have a hunger for learning more about how to be better next year. And that's really where your green thumb comes from. So don't ever feel like you can't garden because you don't have said thumb, and it's really just about your interest and dedication to learning what went wrong and how to do better next time. Okay, so here's another truth about gardening, is that what you see online is always like butterflies and rainbows. Everybody's showing these amazing harvests and these rainbow colored baskets and all of how much food that they've grown and these bounties, and that's not the truth. The reality with gardening is it's an endless struggle. I swear, as rewarding as gardening is and being able to harvest things, it is such a stressful hobby. And I know that they say gardening is good for your mental health, but like, as someone who deals with a lot of anxiety and bad days, gardening is not always good for your mental health. When you put in hours or weeks of your time growing food only to find out that it's been eaten or infested with something, it is like the hardest blow on your mind that you'll ever experience. Last year, I was so excited. I'd grown cauliflower. We just moved to Ottawa. We'd been having so many issues moving here. Like, it was probably one of the hardest times that I've gone through. I had this beautiful head of cauliflower that I had grown from seed. I spent weeks maintaining. I came out one morning, a groundhog ate the entire head of my cauliflower. And I'd already been going through so much here that it just like tipped me over the edge. And you know, we're sharing this space with animals. Like, these animals were here before we were. These are their spaces: mice, rats, groundhogs, skunks, wild turkeys, birds, chipmunks that you can hear in the background. And it's so hard when something eats your vegetables for you to not just want to be like, these things do not belong here. And I mean, why wouldn't a groundhog go after a perfectly delicious cauliflower? And that's something that's never really shared online a lot, is just how much it feels like you're at war with nature. The animals coming through and eating your stuff, the mice eating or rats eating part of your beautiful tomatoes and leaving them on the fence, or the groundhogs have such an appetite, they'll eat everything. And then you have cucumber beetles eating every last bloom on your cucumber plant, so you never get a single cucumber. And the squash vine borer is killing your zucchini. And the peppers all have maggots in them, and your apples all have maggots in them, and then there's leaf miners in your Swiss chard. The list goes on longer than that. And that's not something that anyone really talks about, is just how many things you're working against while you're gardening. And so, yeah, you may get one rainbow basket of fruit and vegetables to share on your Instagram or online somewhere, but you're constantly battling different exterior forces, and it can be incredibly stressful. I have moved over to a lot of flowers because I have found that vegetables can stress me out too much when I'm just like, after the winter comes, sometimes my mental health isn't great because we have seen so many clouds and I get seasonal affective disorder. And so a lot of times I switch to flowers because there's just a lot less pests for them. And when they bloom, they're just so beautiful that it's worth it for me, even if I can't get food from them. And so there is also a lot of joy that can come out of gardening. When you grow something and you get your first ever pepper, your first ever tomato. I love growing fruit. When I can pick a basket of raspberries that are so expensive at the grocery store, that is such a feeling. And so for all of the stress, there is a lot of reward that comes with it as well. But for all of the articles and places online that tout gardening as a great hobby for your mental health, I would not say that's always true. And if you have a larger garden and you end up planting too much that you're overflowing, right now my kitchen counters are covered in apples and plums and tomatoes and hot peppers and sweet potatoes. It can feel super overwhelming that you have to process all of this food before it goes bad. And you know, you've got so much going on in your life. You have your partner or your pets or your kids or just your job. And so then to add on where everything comes ripe at the same time of the year in August and September, and you're just literally looking at your food hoping it doesn't rot before you can get to it, there's a whole other level of guilt and stress that is involved with that just never gets talked about. And I think it's important to discuss that it's not all butterflies and rainbows in gardening, and it can actually be a really stressful hobby that people aren't prepared for. And I never want to discourage someone from starting a garden because it is such an amazing hobby to learn how to grow your own food, and there's a lot of value in food security. Knowing how to grow your own food and where it comes from and how to make sure that your family is supported with fresh food is super, super important and valuable. But know your limits, and if you know that you don't have a ton of time, don't plant a big garden. Don't plant 45 tomato plants if you really don't have time to process 45 plants worth of tomatoes. Just plant what you like to eat fresh, so that way you can just eat them as they ripen and you can enjoy them and you don't have to process them. Or if you really have that homesteading idea in your mind, just make sure that you're prepared in August and September to slow your life down and have to maintain what's coming out of the garden, because otherwise you will feel so overwhelmed that it takes away from the joys and benefits of gardening as a hobby. Okay, so the next truth about gardening is that so many people have the wrong idea or the wrong expectations about what it is. For example, gardening and homesteading are not the same. Gardening is, what I do. I grow some gardens in my backyard, have some fruit in it. And homesteading is the idea of, having your own animals or producing all of your own food and not buying from the grocery store. And I would highly suggest looking up in the search bar, quit homestead, and you would be surprised at the amount of people who are quitting homesteading because they had the wrong expectations. And again, it's the same concept of butterflies and rainbows, that everything is going to be easy and that leaving your city life for the country life is glorious, and it's just not true. Nobody thinks about, when they move to the country, about how much land you have to make sure is being maintained. that there are way more animals and insects, like commonly getting ant infestations in your house in the country, that people drop garbage on your property and you have to clean it up, that people drop abandoned animals on your property that you have to figure out what to do with. There are so many things that exist in the country living that is not the same as city living that so many people don't recognize, and then they fantasize about, oh, I'm gonna be this country person and I'm gonna homestead and grow my own stuff. It's really not that easy. And then on top of it all, I think a lot of these people put heavy expectations on themselves that if you're gonna go and do homesteading, you have to do it perfectly, because there's another person on the internet, on YouTube or Instagram, who's doing everything perfectly, because for that 1 minute of filming, they've made sure that they've done it perfectly. And we build up these expectations on ourselves that everything has to be done right and we can't get anything wrong. And if we can't make our own pasta sauce that lasts our family a whole year, then we're failures. Or we can't, you know, make our own pickles and pasta sauce and all these canned goods by ourselves, otherwise we're failures. And I think that the internet contributes a lot to that. And then nobody really talks about the amount of work that honestly comes with it. And then you can't just homestead without a job, because who's affording the plot of land and building the house or maintaining your house or buying the seedlings or the seeds or the jars that you need for canning? So then you need a job on top of it. But then who can have a full-time job while maintaining animals or chickens or growing food? And then if you ever look and talk to some farmers at farmers markets, none of these people are rich. They are not getting rich selling their food at farmers markets. And you can hear about farmers who have a farm stand, and there are people who come up to them and say, I'm not paying this, I'm gonna negotiate, I wanna pay you less for your food. But they don't walk into a grocery store and say, hey, I'm not paying this much for these apples or oranges, I'm gonna negotiate a price. The price is the price. And so it just shows you that there is not a lot of value in the food that is being grown locally. And so even if you think you're gonna have a homestead or, you know, a large enough backyard that you can have a farm stand, the money's not there. And these are just things that don't ever get talked about. It's always people are selling you on the idea and the fantasy of what it would be like to have your own homestead or your own farm or living in the country, and it's just not reality. And so this is the same when it comes to gardening. I have not a ton of space, maybe 110 square feet, but yet I continue to have these expectations and this reality in my mind that I'm gonna grow enough paste tomatoes to make a year's supply of pasta sauce, even though I don't know how to can yet. Or I'm gonna make my own garden fresh salsa and can it for the whole year. I have all of these expectations of what I wanna do because I wanna save money on groceries, and I want to have the ability and understanding to can food in order to save money on groceries. And it's just not true. I think you need 1 acre of land for 2 people. Like, not an acre plus your house on it, like an acre of farmland space in order to grow enough food to sustain 2 people. And so the reality is, as a home gardener, you're never going to be able to produce enough in your backyard garden to make so many different foods unless you dedicate your entire backyard and you have a decent amount of land. You're never gonna grow as much as you think you can. And really, it's about setting your expectations that whatever you grow are things that you want to eat and enjoy fresh, with maybe a little bit of extra that you can freeze. I do get enough zucchini that I can freeze it for the winter, and we grew enough edamame that we could freeze a little bit of it, but it's really, I'm still gonna be buying it in the winter time for a snack. And so it's really just coming up with that, coming to terms with the expectation that what you're growing is really meant to enjoy it fresh. And if you get enough extra to freeze, then you are lucky, and that is a great place to be. And again, this is if you're a backyard gardener, not if you have an acre of land, because then things change, but you just have to be prepared for that overwhelm. And so as much fun as it is in the springtime to fantasize about, oh, my garden's gonna produce a ton and it's gonna be amazing, you gotta bring yourself back to reality. Which comes to another truth, is that plants ripen at different times. And so for the beginning of the season, I'm drowning in zucchini, and that's the only thing I'm getting out of my garden. Lettuce and peas maybe, but for the other like true summer crop, I'm literally drowning in zucchini, and that's all I'm getting. So I'm still having to buy groceries, a full grocery shop, just no zucchini in it. Then later, as the weeks go on, I might be getting some zucchini and a bunch of cucumbers, and that's all I'm getting. And you get, because of being a backyard gardener, you only can plant so many plants each. So like you maybe only can fit 2 peppers and 4 tomatoes and a couple things here and there. And so you just have to be aware that you're gonna get the most random harvest, where you're gonna have 2 tomatoes and 1 pepper and a cucumber, and that's what you're gonna be harvesting out of your garden. And then you have to be like, well, what can I eat this with? Like, you can have a salad, or you might get like an eggplant and a cucumber, and you're like, what am I supposed to do with this meal? And so there'll be a few times where you can make an entire meal out of everything you've grown from your backyard, and most of the times that's not gonna happen. And so be prepared that you're still gonna be buying groceries even if you have a garden. And maybe a lot of people know this, but there are a select few of us potentially who think that we're gonna be able to sustain our entire grocery bill over the summer on what we grow out of the garden. And that is just not true. And so you just have to set your expectations that you are going to get some random items from your garden that can supplement a meal, but overall, there really isn't going to be massive savings that come from this. Which brings me to my final truth, which to me is the most exposing of everything, is how expensive gardening has gotten, especially since COVID. COVID made gardening really popular, and with it came all of the same type of things that come with anything that capitalism has hit, and that includes like making these showy, beautiful backyards of expensive garden beds and fancy systems and pretty flowers and et cetera, et cetera. And gardening they used to build the victory gardens that happened during the war, where people started growing food for other people in their neighborhood and their city. And that was just where you dug up your lawn and you started growing in the ground. And that's how my grandparents all gardened. And it has just like absolutely changed. Gardening has gotten so expensive, where you can fill up your entire backyard with metal raised beds that come in all kinds of different colors and heights and shapes, and they look absolutely beautiful, but they're gonna cost you $5,000–6,000 to do it. And I don't know how we got here. I don't know how capitalism got a hold of gardening the way they did, where financial investment companies have found their way into an industry where the entire purpose of gardening was meant to provide yourself food security and supplement your grocery bill. But it became more of like a status symbol of what your garden looked like versus like what you're properly getting out of your garden. And I just love seeing people who, you know, dig up their lawn and they're planting directly in the ground and they're growing that way because this is the way that it's always been done. I do have raised beds because I just don't want to bend over as much. Like, I like the height of it and I like having access to what type of soil I can put in my garden. But I only grow in wood raised beds because they are affordable and I have all the tools I need to build them. I do have one metal raised bed that was gifted to me, and so it looks completely out of place because I have the one metal raised bed and then I built 2 wood raised beds side by side with it, and they look totally out of place. But I'm just not the type of person who wants to spend thousands of dollars on a garden. But the reality is that this is where gardening has gotten, and especially in Canada here, and I think the US parts of it are seeing the same thing that we are here, is that to grow a garden, the truth is you need property. You can grow on a balcony and have a smaller garden, which is totally worth your time, and I absolutely think you should do it. But gardening comes with privilege now because you need property in order to grow on it. I did get access to an allotment and it cost me about $100 a year. So if your city has community gardens or allotments, definitely look it up and see if you can get into one of those. And it's a lot more affordable because you're growing in the ground, and so you don't really need to purchase much. Although even my allotment, I'm gonna have to invest like at least $500 into it, building a fence because there was no fence there, and I want to have some patio cushions to sit at so that way I have a place to take a break, and it just adds up. And it's just something that gardening was never supposed to be. It was never supposed to be expensive, and yet here we are. And that is why I wrote a free ebook that's on my website that's how to garden for almost free. It's actually full of every component that you need in order to garden, from your soil to your pots to your seeds to your water, and how to do it all for free. But I do have parts of it that are low cost options if the free isn't viable or you want to go and spend a little bit more. And I made this ebook specifically because of how expensive gardening is and how growing your own food is a right, in my opinion, for food security. And so I'm going to link it below if you're interested in finding out ways to garden for less, especially if you're a beginner or you don't want to spend $1,000 on building your own gardens. And you know, when you grow in raised beds like I do, you have to pay for the wood, and then raised beds settle every single year, so you're buying new soil every single year, and you have to own the tools to move the soil around into your garden. And then if you don't grow from seed, you have to buy seedlings, which can add up quickly. And if you grow from seed, you have to have your seed starting equipment. And I try and do things as sustainable as possible, which means I avoid plastic as much as possible. So buying a metal shelf for my seed starting was so much more expensive. A plastic one is $40 for a shelf and a metal one is $200. And so just to do the right thing and try and have environmentally friendly options cost me 4 times as much as going with the black plastic that is just garbage at the end. And so there's just all of these different factors can add up quickly, and you go from the idea of I'm going to save money on groceries, and $1,000 later you're picking 4 tomatoes. And that's always like a running joke or a meme that you find on the internet now is I paid $70 for this one tomato that I could have bought for 70 cents at the grocery store. And it's just one of those extra expectations that you don't realize how expensive the hobby can be and how much you have to invest every single year. It's not like you pay it one time. And so that's why I really recommend this ebook that I have, because it's a great way for you to at least lower your cost or lower your initial investment. But for anybody who says that gardening is cheap or free, they are putting in a lot more effort, because you can do it for cheap and you can do it for free, but you're paying for it in time. And so really you have to weigh if you have more time or you have more money, or if you want to sacrifice your time for some money on certain things. But the capitalism has made it to gardening, and you have to be careful. And if you are starting a new garden, you really should set yourself a budget of what you need to buy and stick to it, because you can pass that budget and overspend it faster than you realize, because things have gotten so much more expensive. And you really want to find companies that focus more on And my gardener, if you have ever seen him, he did a recent video about why his seeds are so much more affordable than other companies, which was a really interesting video to watch. And all of his seeds are $2 right now at the time of this recording. And so you really want to spend your time and energy looking for ethical places or affordable places, because otherwise you can spend so much more than you ever expected, because it's become such a popular hobby that everybody has jumped in. And there are so many tools on the market that you do not need that people are selling, but they're fun or they're cool or they're interesting. And they're shiny new toys that are being shown all over the internet because these companies can afford to hire content creators to promote their products, and they're absolutely unnecessary for the garden. You really only need a handful of tools, in my opinion, in order to garden properly, and these are always really useful tools. So just watch yourself and watch if you're being marketed to, and watch what your goals are. If your goals are to grow food for food security, or if you want to have the showy backyard that everybody's envious of, just watch and decide on what you're doing, because you can get caught up and spend a lot of money on something that isn't going to give you the same benefits back necessarily. And that's it. Those are all my truths on gardening that I had to get out to you, so that way you knew and you were aware of them. And I hope you liked this video. If you did, make sure to give it a thumbs up and subscribe to the channel, and I will see you in the next video. Bye.